Lola Chetti is an executive coach and leadership specialist based in New York. She holds an MCC credential and has worked globally for 17 years. She co-authored the book, Developing Ethical Maturity, the ICF Code of Ethics, Principles, Decision-Making, and the ICF exams for ACC, PCC, and MCC coaches. Welcome to the show, Lola.
Thank you, Michael.
It's so good to have you here with us today to talk about ethics and coaching. So I'd like to start by just asking a general question. Why
Yes.
is ethics important in the world of coaching?
If we reflect about what coaching is, the whole profession of coaching, it's literally, it wouldn't exist if there was no trust and psychological safety. Because people come to us with a need, and think about ourselves. When we go with a need, we are vulnerable. And I like to say trust is the oxygen of coaching, and ethics allows trust to flourish, and it allows psychological safety through all its standards and also the rules around ethics.
Interesting. Yeah, that's much deeper than I thought. When I first joined the ICF, I was excited to be able to put a link to the code of ethics on my coaching
Yeah.
agreement because I thought it would show that I adhered to a code that they could read and understand, and it just gave me greater credibility as a coach. But this idea of trust being the oxygen of coaching and it being based on ethical principles, that makes even more sense to me and makes me feel even better about having that code that I live by.
But you're absolutely right. It does also give credibility. Coaching is not a regulated profession. And to be able to say that I have credentials, I have accountability around my hours and experience, and I adhere to a code of ethics and I can be held accountable, it also creates trust in the profession, Michael.
How did you come to be so interested in the ethics of coaching?
That's a very interesting question. But I think it's really coming from my background, how I became a coach, and also the job that I did before. I used to be a barrister and I was on the bench in the judiciary. So, of course, I was trained on ethics. And coaching came from a volunteer work that I did for as a part-time volunteer for a few years, over 6 years with refugees, Chin refugees from Myanmar. And I think I was able to immediately, not only I used my coaching skills with the children who were around 15, but immediately the context in which I was using these skills, it was a vulnerable population. So we understand also the vulnerability that comes with coaching, but also in the judiciary, I learned that um, when we want to preserve integrity, when we want to preserve belief in in the judicial system, it cannot always be laws and standards. We also to have an internal framework. Even if we are not being held accountable or no one is seeing us, our behavior is constantly reinforcing the reputation, our reputation, and the reputation of what we do. And I think that's what really brought this interest in ethics.
That is really interesting, and I can see that you've maintained your interest because you're continuing to do work in the field.
Yes, I am really passionate about it.
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to asking some more questions. But
Yes.
first, I want to share this one engagement that I had in the past, Lola, and get your advice on the spot about what I should have done differently.
Yes.
So I had an engagement early in my executive coaching career. This was many years ago, and it had multiple red flags, which I ignored. I was assigned a client who was a senior leader in the organization, and they told me at our intake session that they didn't even feel that they needed coaching. The only reason that they had signed up for the coaching is because they were hoping to set an example for their peers who were the ones who really needed the coaching. So they were kind of just going through the motions for the sake of encouraging their peers to get coaching because they were the ones who really needed it. So that was a red flag to me. But I thought it's okay. I'll just push through. They will wake up to the power of coaching and become open and vulnerable and so forth. Well, it didn't really get better then. They would cancel appointments here and there. I had them read a book. What got you here won't get you there. I thought maybe it would uncover some blind spots for them in their leadership. They read parts of it, but didn't seem to have any real breakthroughs in reading it. I pursued getting feedback by doing what's called a verbal 360, where I interviewed a lot of people who report to them. I think I interviewed about 17 people, and there was a fair amount of constructive or negative feedback about their leadership. And my client basically deflected it all, denied it all. He didn't accept any of the negative or constructive feedback and only appreciated the positive feedback that he received and pointed my attention to that. And all along, I just kept pushing through and never said anything to the sponsor. And I think the reason why is because I was scared of looking like an ineffective coach because I was still relatively new. I didn't have a lot of confidence yet in my process and my skills. I thought that maybe I wouldn't get any more coaching from this company, and I still had this little small hope that maybe something would happen positive in the coaching engagement, and it would be looked upon favorably. Well, it didn't get better. The client actually decided that he had no more appetite for the coaching and basically fired me. He said, I don't want to do this anymore. I think I've had enough of the coaching. Thank you very much. And he just ended the engagement. Not that long afterwards, the person was actually let go from the company because of their inability to face the truth and accept that they had shortcomings, and they had done some things that had actually put the company into a tricky legal position. So clearly, they were not an effective leader for the organization. But looking back, this is one of my greatest regrets in my coaching engagements. What should I have done differently?
Hmm. Well, thank you. Very um, interesting, but also complex case. I have two questions before I answer, Michael. So this company paid for the coaching initiative. Yes,
Yes.
I can gather this. I don't want to make assumptions. The second question would be, you said he was let go because he did something nefarious to the organization, but also he was resistant to feedback. Is there any relationship to your contract with him where he refused feedback?
In terms of being let go,
Yes.
no, I don't think so. There was a period of time that had elapsed between the end of our engagement and him
Oh,
being let go, and I don't think there was actually a connection with the coaching. I ended up staying with the company and coaching with them successfully for a period of about 2 years, and this
okay.
was in the first year where I had received this person as a client.
Okay, so it's not related to the feedback within the session because I wanted to clarify this. I think when I listen to you, the first red flag that I see is misaligned agendas and objectives. The importance of having a coaching contract is to clarify and align objectives. So from the beginning, there was a misaligned objective. And therefore, it's very difficult because an objective is also to make sure that we follow the client's agenda. This is what coaching is about. And so that the outcome can be related to the initial objective. It's also a measure of accountability. And therefore, the misalignment was here. The second part, when I hear, I can hear your good intentions, and very often ethical dilemmas crop up and ethical lapses despite good intention, and even breaches in spite of good intention. And this raises really the importance of working on one's ethical maturity. And that's why I wrote a book on it. And this starts with ethical awareness. And the first part is the use of the word push. So we have to be very worried about having zero agenda with the client. It's about clarifying what they want, where they want to go. Our hopes for them cannot be the objective. And they had no objective for the coaching. Literally, it was to set an example. That's not a coaching objective. That's not a commitment to coaching. And I'm trying to follow what you said. Also, you remembered that he missed, for example, then it's very difficult to impose accountability because in the first place, it was to be an example. I just wanted to kind of, it was almost like a cover.
Yeah.
Others get coaching because I'm getting coaching. So it's very difficult to impose accountability, misaligned agendas. There's also a little bit of, and this is where self-interest is normal in everybody and in coaches too. We earn to get a living, and sometimes we don't, we think, oh my God, if I get out of here, I lose everything else. It's happened to me 2 or 3 times. I've lost everything else. So, and this is really, I would say this is ethics. That's why when we talk about ethical maturity, and uh, and I wrote about ethical maturity in a book with Jonathan Passmore, and this is where it's so important to look at the awareness. How aware are we of what we are doing and the impact, but also to consider our self-interest. And we all know if we look all the research on trust, because I also teach leadership, and all the research on trust shows that self-interest actually reduces and destroys trust, not only in coaching, everywhere in relationships, because then there is a conflict of interest. And here there was a conflict of interest between yourself and the client, what you wanted to do and what they wanted to do. But there was also an important point that I picked up when you said I couldn't tell the company anything. And I think here you weren't wrong, actually, because you may have breached, speaking to the company and telling them about the client could have been a breach of ethics, going back to the contract, because confidentiality is a given. We speak about attendance, we speak about objective, but to actually go and have a judgment on the client, and especially that would have needed complete transparency from you, but it also could have been something very, which went against the client's interest. And here that would have been an imbalance of power. Where you did right was to allow the client to go because the code of ethics says the client can go. And I think that's really, there was something that popped up in my mind. It's also then, I think the standard which says in the code of ethics that we have to recognize when we have limitations. And here
Mhm.
there is a limitation. And the best policy is transparency and, if needed, withdrawal after speaking to the client. And it's really here again, it's all about ethical awareness, ethical reasoning, decision making, and always be developing ethical maturity. So thank you. Thank you for bringing this case and for, your absolute honesty and transparency, because you are also educating others.
Thanks, Lola. It feels good to actually talk with you about it and to hear your thoughts on the engagement because it's certainly one that has troubled me over the years. And I think I learned a lot from the mistakes that I made in that engagement and I'm a better coach for it now. Well, now I want to ask you the question that is on most coaches' minds watching this interview. What do you suggest a coach do in a sponsored engagement when the sponsor just wants to hear more about what's going on inside of the engagement?
I think it's probably the easiest answer for me. It's going back again to our code of ethics. What does it say about confidentiality? Confidentiality is a given if we look at the ICF code of ethics. And if ever anything is going to change in the contract, and if we had contracted not to keep confidentiality, it should be for informed consent, because the client comes to us trusting us, but they don't really have a clear view of what would happen if they agree to, excluding confidentiality. So it has to be informed consent, and we see that in the insights and consideration for ethics statements. So it's clear it's a calm know, but I know, and I don't want to give, these answers which people will think, oh, well, then I lose my coaching contract. It can be a very compassionate no. We're saying this wasn't this is the contract, this is my code of ethics, and this is what I have. But if you want to know more, what we can do is have a tripartite, which the client facilitates, right? But if we continue pushing, and I have seen someone who did that, who wanted halfway more information that was contracted for. And I think it's time then to decide, is that a company that, is it worth it to lose my credential? I think a lot of people don't think about this question. Is it worth it to affect my reputation here? And I think that this is where also the code of ethics protects us from uninformed requests.
So what I'm getting from that, Lola, is that it's really important for us as coaches to be very clear about what's in the contract and what coaching is, so the sponsor understands what are going to be the boundaries around the coaching relationship and the nature of confidentiality.
Absolutely. Just like in real life, Michael, whenever we sign a contract, we have to be so careful about the contract because it actually engages our responsibility and legally as well. So we have to be very careful about what am I signing to, what am I adhering to? Is that aligned to the code of ethics? First, and that's why contracts, whenever there is anything, look at the contract. What does the contract say? And is that with informed consent from the client and then the code of ethics?
So another common question is, what do you suggest a coach do when they're in a sponsored engagement? And I often refer to sponsored engagements because in executive coaching, the world I live in, as you know, most of those engagements are sponsored by the organization. What do you do when the coachee talks about wanting to leave the company?
Again, I think let's go back to the contract because I've had a couple of engagements where they said, if the coaches come to you and ask for help to leave, we would rather you do, even if you don't tell us, because we do not want to keep people who do not want to work for us, right? Only
Mm.
two in 17 years. One was actually, very recently. So then it's not an issue. But if a coach is just saying it to us, we still keep confidentiality, right? It's another thing if they say, ask me, let's have a session to help me leave, then this could potentially be a conflict of interest with the coach, depending on the contract that they've signed, because does this go against what we call going any information against the company's interest? And I think these things should be clarified because it's so common. I mean, I've been coaching for 17 years, nearly 18. It's so common that this happened that we have to clarify this with the sponsor. And if we haven't, to go and clarify, but also not clarifying once we've already started coaching, because then it puts our client in a quandary, but clarifying very carefully. And if we've contracted and this is considered to be, to say, look, I understand and this is confidential, but I cannot help you on this because this is how it's construed on the, but it doesn't stop that I am here to help you develop your executive and leadership skills. And wherever that may take you, whatever decision you may take, you may still use it. How about we focus on our objectives here?
That's such a good answer in the sense that my eyes have just been open to this idea that you could talk to the sponsor before the coaching starts and say, what is your position on this coming up in the
Yes.
coaching conversation? How do you feel about that? Obviously, I'm not here in a position to support them in leaving the company, but what do you think? And as you said, some companies may feel like, go ahead. If they want to leave the company, go ahead and support them in leaving the company. Is that what I heard that some
Yeah.
companies might feel that way?
Yes, well, it's been only two companies, and I
Mhm.
think that's also the importance of. You did tell me, Michael, that I could refer to my book that
Okay.
I wrote, which is the book of Developing Ethical Maturity. So when I go and I ask companies whether they are okay, this comes from experience at the beginning, just like you, not knowing what to do, panicking, giving a half-baked answer, then reflecting for it, going through supervision so that I know it happens often enough that to think, okay, anything goes in which goes against the interest of a company, which is a standard in most coaching contract. So we have to say, what is it that you construe as going against the there are things which are obvious, but would you say if the person wishes to leave or wishes the support to leave, and they may say, we don't mind them leaving, but we don't want you to spend time on then helping them to leave. But so it all depends on what we contracted for. And that's why contracting sets coaching up for success.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me think that while the ICF requires that people who are renewing their credential take the ICF Code of Ethics class, it might be good to also have a class just on contracting, that because it's so important to get it right in the beginning to support an effective engagement and an ongoing relationship with the sponsor that's mutually beneficial and hopefully creates ongoing work for you as the coach.
And this is also where I think it should be done when we are learning how to coach,
Mm.
because we know that I'm an experienced coach. I teach six people a year. So it's not a coaching school, but I make sure that I share, and this is part of ethical framework. I share all the pitfalls. And also, I even the answer what I gave you is the answer that I also teach to my students, because this is part of coaching education. Because all these educators, I would think that they are also very seasoned executive coaches, and when they have this experience of practical coaching, because coaching is more than a methodology. It's also a way of being. It's also the practical aspects of how we navigate the world and our sponsors. And I think this is where coaching education matters a lot.
Can it be okay to coach a manager and one of their direct reports at the same time?
I would say it has to go back to contracting again.
Mm.
Whenever we add layers and power dynamics in a coaching relationship, it really becomes a terrain for ethical gray areas. And it's not just the question, it's the power dynamic. How would we, and I always tell people, how would I feel if, for example, I didn't get along really well with my boss, but we were both being coached by the same person? How would you feel? The level of trust. And it's not in you, but just thinking, and there's the power dynamic too. The boss is higher up in the hierarchy. He is the person probably choosing the coach, not the client, right? Not
Mm.
the subordinate. And therefore, power dynamics are always present. And I think it's also probably the psychodynamic lenses. I'm a trained psychodynamic coach. So I always look at power dynamics. I would say we can't just say, it's ethical or not ethical, it's contextual. It's how they contract. If we are coaching them only on certain subjects, how to influence, or working on a project of when there is no conflict and it's totally separated and the contract says clearly confidentiality. But I'll answer personally, I wouldn't do it because constantly we are human beings. We can always let things slip as human beings. And then I would say anybody who does this, get a really good supervisor to discuss your practice, to keep you safe and keep the client safe first.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much again. Getting back to the contracting and maybe doing what you can to avoid ethical dilemmas and their potential in the first place.
Yes.
We're now wrapping up part one of our conversation, but there's more to come. As you can see, this is a deep and comprehensive conversation that covers a lot of ground. So I encourage you to look forward to watching part two of my interview with Lola, where I'll ask questions such as, should you coach a manager in their direct report? What would you recommend that a coach do when they feel that something isn't right? Or what happens when there actually has been a breach? What does the ICF do in their procedure to investigate such a report? All of this and more will be revealed to you in part two of my interview with Lola. I hope you'll watch it.